Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are doing something really fascinating. We are literally following the money. We're going to track exactly where our tax money goes and figure out how the public sector actually steers the whole economy. Whether you're staring down your latest tax return or just skimming headlines about the national debt, understanding the nuts and bolts of government and the economy is an absolute game changer for decoding the world around us. So let's dive right in. Real quick, here is our roadmap for today. We'll be breaking this down into 5 logical steps. We've got why we need government, the anatomy of the public sector, fiscal policy and budgets, government spending and action, and finally, the mechanics of taxation. All right, starting off with Section 1, why we need government. So we really have to ask ourselves this fundamental question first. Why do we even need the government involved in the economy? We all know private initiative and market forces are incredibly efficient at what they do, but the reality, well, they just aren't perfect. They honestly can't do it all on their own. There are a few very specific reasons authorities absolutely have to step in. First up, markets literally need rules to function, so the government provides the necessary legal framework. Second, sometimes markets just fail, right? And that requires the public provision of certain goods. Third, sure, markets produce efficient outcomes, but let's be honest, those outcomes aren't always equitable or fair. And finally, markets naturally tend to generate instability through those boom and bust business cycles. So, the takeaway here, both the government and the private markets are absolutely essential for a healthy economy. That brings us right along to Section 2, Anatomy of the Public Sector. Now that we know why we need this entity, let's actually look at how it's built. It's basically organized into distinct layers. Right at the top, you've got the national government. That's your legislature, executive, and judiciary, handling massive countrywide stuff like defense. Step down a rung, and you're at the provincial government, taking care of regional things like housing and provincial infrastructure. And then right at the base, we have the municipal government. That's the one that touches our daily lives the most, dealing with local everyday issues like sewerage and waste services. But wait, we need to make a super important distinction here. That general government we just talked about, that's those national, provincial, and local levels. But when we say the public sector, we mean that general government plus public corporations and state-owned entities. We're talking about giants like Eskom and Transnet. So whenever we discuss the public sector's impact on the economy, we are absolutely factoring in these massive state-owned entities too. Moving on to Section 3, Fiscal Policy and Budgets. So now we know who the government is, but how do they actually drive the economy? Enter fiscal policy. Basically, fiscal policy is the level and composition of government spending, taxation, and borrowing. And the main steering wheel they use to pull this off is the annual budget. The budget is, at its core, a reflection of political decisions, how much to spend, what exactly to spend it on, and how on earth to pay for it. And what's really key to remember is that fiscal policy is seen as a much more direct way to intervene in the economy and counter those bumpy business cycles compared to just using monetary policy. Let's look at how this works in practice. How does the government respond when the economy fluctuates? Well, during a recession, the state basically hits the gas pedal. That's called expansionary fiscal policy. Government spending goes up, taxes might drop, and the budget deficit actually grows to stimulate the economy. On the flip side, if the economy is booming and expanding too fast, they hit the brakes with contractionary fiscal policy. Spending gets cut, taxes might go up, and that budget deficit shrinks to stop the whole system from overheating. Let's take a look at Section 4, Government Spending in Action. Time to open the checkbook and look at some real-world data, specifically looking back at the 2021 budget speech. And we're going to start with this pretty sobering quote right from that speech. Our public finances are dangerously overstretched. We owe a lot of people a lot of money. That really hits home, doesn't it? It highlights the heavy, very real burden of public debt that policymakers are constantly wrestling with. And when a government hits a wall like that, they have to pivot. That's exactly why that same budget pushed the idea of zero-based budgeting, to rigorously force efficiency and make sure every single expense is completely justified. To really grasp why things are so overstretched, just look at this staggering number. 2 trillion rand. That was the total expenditure mapped out in the 2021 budget. It's just astronomical. The sheer scale of this macroeconomic machine takes a monumental amount of funding just to keep the lights on and keep society functioning. So where does a mountain of money like that actually go historically? Well, nearly a quarter of it gets swallowed up by general public services, and notably, that includes servicing public debt transactions. Right behind that, you've got massive commitments to education at 18.8%, social protection at 13.4%, and health coming in at nearly 11.5%. The big takeaway here? There is an incredibly heavy reliance on funding those foundational social services just to maintain the absolute baseline of our society. Which brings us right to our final stage, Section 5, the mechanics of taxation. We've seen the 2 trillion rand machine and where all the money goes. But how does the government actually fund it? Well, before they just start collecting money, they work from a blueprint of what makes a tax system both fair and efficient. A good tax has to meet a few criteria. First, neutrality, meaning it should mess with relative market prices as little as possible. Then there's equity. This breaks down into the ability to pay principle, which means horizontal equity, where people earning the same pay the same, and vertical equity, where higher earners pay more. Equity also includes the benefit principle, which is exactly what it sounds like. If you use a specific public service, you pay for it. And finally, a good tax just has to be administratively simple, keeping the actual compliance costs low. Once you have those ground rules, you can sort the taxes into categories. The biggest split is direct versus indirect. Direct taxes are levied straight on people, specifically targeting your wealth and income. Think of the money pulled directly out of your paycheck before you even see it. Indirect taxes, on the other hand, are levied on transactions, goods, and services. The extra amount you pay when you're checking out at the store. Now keep in mind, these aren't always totally separate boxes. Taxes can absolutely cross over into multiple categories. Take value-added tax, or VAT, for example. It is an indirect tax because you pay it on a transaction, but it's also a general tax because it's applied really broadly to most goods and services across the entire economy. It isn't just targeting one specific thing, like a tax on alcohol or fuel. Lastly, we really have to look at how these different taxes actually impact households. A progressive tax means that as your income goes up, the percentage of that income you pay in tax goes up too. This directly addresses that vertical equity idea we talked about a minute ago. Then you have a proportional tax, which keeps the ratio exactly the same no matter what you earn. But a regressive tax, that's one that ends up taking a larger percentage of a poorer household's income compared to a wealthier one. And as you can imagine, that's something policymakers generally try to avoid or at least balance out. Okay, so we've covered the why, the who, the how, and the actual literal cost of government intervention in the economy. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. As you look at your very next paycheck, or even just the receipt from your next grocery run, think about all these mechanics at play. Where do you fit into this grand design of the public sector? And how is your contribution steering this massive macroeconomic machine we've just explored? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you next time.